This evening, and St. Miguel, with whom we were involved at prayer this morning. So let us recall that we are in the presence of God and his saints. The founder prayed this reality in these words: "You are with me as you are with the saints in heaven. And although I understand and taste this happiness only insofar as it is possible by faith, still I look on it as being so great that I am habitually in adoration before you in spirit and heart to testify my gratitude. This constitutes the happiness of the angels and saints, and though they enjoy it in a different manner, it is you, O my God, who are the object of their contentment and happiness, as of that which I now feel within me while I think of you. Accept, I beseech you, O my God, the thoughts and sentiments which I hold towards you and your holy presence as an act of thanksgiving for the grace you grant me of thinking here of you and of your presence, since it is an action which I may offer as being most agreeable to you." St. Miguel,
pray for us.
all the holy brothers,
Pray for us.
St. John Baptist de Lasallian,
Pray for us.
with Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.
Okay, without further ado, let's take a trip. What is this? Who's debating our board?
Oh, gee, wow, gee, I'm going to shoot.
I think Frank put that up.
You're the one. That's the Hotel de la Cloche. It's a familiar picture, I'm sure, to you. It now serves as the provincialate for the district of Reims. And in addition to the house here, of course, the founder had another, the family had there's another annex to it to the left of this that's not visible from the photo, on the other side of this entry door here. And then there's a nice garden in the back, which we shall see. At one time, this was open. This street was closed at this point at one time. There was kind of a wall coming this way. Now it's an open street. Okay. There's the famous stairway that you often see in the back. That has since been redone and rehabilitated. What's the word I'm trying to look for? Restored, and it's much nicer looking now than it was at that time. I went through this with Loes, and Loes is cute. He says, "Now we'll get down the stairs," and he says, "Here we are with little John Baptist de Lasallian, 9 years old. Now see how he goes around the stern and see how he goes around the I'm reliving the whole thing. Okay. Now, if you read Beginnings, you'll know that originally behind the house there was a kind of a car path, a cow path, and so it got to be known as the Ruelle, which means little street, d'Odeur. You know what odor is, and you know what cows produce. Now, of course, they didn't have interior plumbing in those days either. So this would have been the little alleyway behind the house where that's where the de La Salle family had their outhouse. The day we happened to go along there, that gate was open, and Loes got ecstatic. He said, "This has never been opened before. Oh, we got to get a picture of the little Ruelle of Little Shit Street." You might Sorry about that. Well, anyway, there it is. So that's the human side. There was a brother who at one time tried to argue that this house, known as Le Verger, was the house where the founder lives. You can see it dates from about that time. You can see the wealthy town mansions that the wealthy bourgeoisie had, and this is facing right on out onto the corn market. but Loes successfully disproved that too from an awful lot of evidence within. It now serves as a museum for the city of Reims. Okay? These are the vineyards, and this is Brouillet. De La Salle's grandfather was the lord of this entire area here. Little town down below, all of that property belonged to him, and these vineyards still produce grapes, and they make champagne out of it. Rose brought me to the house of the man who owns the vineyard and got a bottle of champagne, which I took with me and saved as long as I could. I still have the label someplace, of champagne made from the grapes that are descendants of the grapes that the founder knew. Okay? There's a couple of these slides are slides from that series that Gus had last night, that big red box. I took a picture of this house. They won't let you in. This was the manor house of the Brouillet family, but it's so decrepit now, it's a danger that it's falling apart, and so they won't let you in it. But it's the one I took was overexposed, so this is a better picture to give you an idea of the main manor house in which the founder's grandfather lived, Jean Moet de Brouilly. Okay. This is the village chapel. The grandfather would have had a special banc de seigneur up in the front, which has since disappeared, but this is much the way it was in the founder's time. This is where he undoubtedly went to church with the grandfather when he was visiting him, and possibly where he taught him to say the office. Now, Rose, of course, is a marvelous guy that he comes tripping up to the altar, and he lifts up the carpet this is the carpet coming down from the altar steps, and he says, that little square there, he said, Jean Moet was so attached to Brouilly that he wanted his heart to be buried here. And he said, I often wondered where the heart was. And he says, I found it, because a little mark there indicating that it's the heart of Jean Moet. So that's where the grandfather's heart is. The rest of them they brought back into Reims to be buried in the cemetery of St. Hilary. That's part of the original entrance to the Collège des Bons Enfants. At least that stone up above, and it's not, you'd have to have a darker room and see it more closely, but it still says Collegium Bonum Puerorum in Latin, which of course is the College of the Bons Enfants. But that's not actually the door they entered in. Next. This was the gate where the students entered, and there's two angels here. One's laughing and one's frowning. And of course, these are the little cherubs laughing when they come into school, or frowning when they come out of school, or the other way around, perhaps. Now, this is the site when the founder was 15 years old. As you remember, he moved, the father moved the family to the corner of the Rue Saint Marguerite. And this is the site. The house has completely disappeared. This is a kind of a station for an apartment house that's behind here. The house where he had the brothers at first, or the school teachers, would have been across the street there. But just to give you an idea of how it's located, if you stand here at this corner and look towards the cathedral, here's what you see. He's standing right here. If the founder looked out his window, that's the view he'd get of the Reims Cathedral with the rear, the apse and the flying buttresses at the back. You can see how close everything was there. Okay? Wow. There's the Reims Cathedral, and I was very lucky to catch that one day when I was there. It was in the afternoon, and the sun, or when the western setting sun just hits it, something the way it hits the chapel out here. The whole thing was illuminated. It was very badly damaged during World War I. Suffered tremendous damage. They've restored it all. All of these outside statues and so on are replacements. The originals were very badly weather-beaten, first of all, and war damaged. So they have them in the museum, which is in what used to be the Archbishop's Palace. Marvelous cathedral. I guess it's my favorite, at least as far as the facade is concerned. There's the famous smiling angel. In those doors, they have several of these angels and saints and things, and Reims is famous for its smiling angel. I hope all the angels are smiling when I get to meet them someday. This is a presumption. This was a special gate for the canons. This is at the side of the cathedral. This is the side door of the cathedral here. And the canons had this whole territory for themselves. They had their meeting rooms here. They had offices here. And here's where they would assemble for solemn processions before they went into the side door of the church to join the archbishop or whatever functionary was functioning. If you look, there's on the other side of it, it indicates this. This is the stall. The founder, we know, had stall number 21 as a canon, and of course he had it until they designed the thing. The actual wooden stalls are not the original ones that were there in the founder's lifetime, but all the numbers are in the same place. And Rose showed me that one time when we were out there together, but I didn't get a picture of it. So I went back on another occasion to take the picture. Almost got arrested because they had to climb over several barriers to get in there, and 2 or 3 guards and things came after me, but I escaped. And that's not too well focused. It's not the fault of it's the fault of the photographer. But that's the stained glass window in the Rosetta. John Baptist de La Salle broke modestly the eyes and looked to the right as he was saying the office. That's what he'd see. That's the outside of the this is where the professors live in the School of Theology. And Daniel Egan's room, who was one of his theology professors, was right up here. Okay. Now we go to San Sulpice. This is the outside of the church. It was just the old church had been destroyed, and it was just being rebuilt. The only part of it where that was there when the founder was there is the Lady Chapel in the back, which you can still visit and get into a very Lasallian mood. Where all those famous French bishops are in this monument, Bossuet, Fenelon, I forget who they all are. And it was in this area someplace where the seminary was located in the founder's time. It's all disappeared since then. Okay? And so the seminary was probably somewhere in this area here, in that square in front of the church. There's the chapel of the Sorbonne. It's not a chapel any longer at the present, but Cardinal Richelieu is buried in there. His tomb is in there, and the day I was there for that one, again, I had to sort of break through. They were preparing an art exhibit, and I think I have a picture of Richelieu's tomb, which is where the altar used to be, but I haven't got it here. Well, the founder's parents died, and he went back to Reims, and as part of the executor of his will, he had charge of some of the estates. And this is the estate at Gueux, G-U-E-U-X, a rather large thing, and the family got revenues from some of this. To take that picture, I'm standing on the 18th tee of a golf course. Go ahead. Now there you get an idea of, this was the Archbishop's palace, L'Atelier, of course, and this was the Archbishop's chapel, and then there's the cathedral to the other side. You can see the 2 towers and so on. And this, of course, is where the founder was ordained. There's the altar of the Archbishop's chapel, and they've kept it. It's a museum today. You can see the rope here. But that is the altar at which the founder would have been ordained for what? What did he get in Reims? He would have been tonsured there. He was ordained there. And subdeacon, I think, did he get? No, subdeacon he had to go. Minor orders. Okay. In the museum, they have these displays. Almost got arrested taking this one, too. And this patent is identified as belonging to John Baptist de La Salle. It was probably given to him as an ordination present by his family. And gold cruets. They're identified as having belonged to John Baptist de La Salle. He said his first Mass in the Lady Chapel. You can see how small it is. And that's very, very modest ceremony for his first Mass on Easter Sunday in 1678. And there's the statue of the founder that was put in there in 1951 by the French brothers to commemorate the 300th anniversary of his birth. You can see the typical European benches there. Okay? Now we go to Rouen. That's the Rouen Cathedral, because we have to get up to Father Barret territory, because the founder now is an ordained priest and he's about to meet a certain Adrien Niel, who came from Rouen. There's the Cathedral of Rouen, okay? And this, look way up at the top, it's not dark enough to see it, but around that, see that oval in the very top in the center? There's PN there, Ponce Maillefert, okay? And so this was where the Mailleferts lived. And see, Ponce himself, or maybe it's Madame Maillefert, but I think it's a he. And Ponce came out to wonder who was that character out there taking a picture of this house, and why. Okay. Now this is the Church of the Minims, kind of run down. If you look here close enough, you can see it says Rue des Minimes, Minim Street. Okay? And there's Father Barret himself going up. He happened along just as I was taking the picture. That's the front of the Church of the Minims in Rouen. You'll see it if you look at the map I gave you yesterday. You'll see it. This is the door of the Sisters' Chapel. This is the famous door where Adrien Niel and Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, not knowing each other, were both trying to get in at the same time. And it's the mother house now of the Sisters of the Infant Jesus and Reed. And if you go inside, it was at Christmas time, and there's the picture of De La Salle as the founder, and Nicholas Roland, the two founders of the Sisters. Okay. Oh, I should have built this up. But remember, I told you about the box they open up, and there's the head of Nicholas Roland. It's his decimals, taken from a death mask, right? So they wouldn't have any trouble about him, even the cute little mustache. This is the Church of St. Maurice. This is where the first school was opened. And the school was probably in this building right here on the side of the church. So that's the first Christian school of Adrien Niel, which Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. This is the Church of St. Jacques. And the school building would have been here, probably in this corner. Obviously, it's disappeared. But the church is still there, and the founder spent a lot of time probably praying there. He certainly went to and this is the parish where he went to teach school, going across town in the Havre. This is, he moves out of his mansion into the Rue Neuve. The building that he moved into would have been right here. Remember when we looked at the map, we had that little gap in between? That's been there ever since. And then little by little, he acquired more and more buildings, and that association in Reims, by the time they were finished, had this whole triangular piece of property on the Rue Neuve and the Rue de Contreil. Okay, and the Rue de Contreil, we still have a school operating there. This was built mostly with American money at the time of the second century thing in 1880. Now this is the Basilica of St. Remy. This is where he had the sacristan lock him up all night long. So you see, this itself is a rather imposing thing, way over on the southern end of the city. And attached to it, of course, was a big Benedictine monastic foundation. And there's the tomb of St. Remy. See this big, enormous thing, and it would have been here probably that the founder did all his prayer. Otherwise, it's it's Roman, and it's very bare. There's not an awful lot of decoration in that. Just to do a little name dropping as we go through to tie it all together, this is the entrance to the property of the Duke of Mazarin up in Rethel. And this is Laon. This is the cathedral in Laon. And of course, all these cathedrals had gargoyles. But the people in Laon, and Laon is up on top of a big hill already, so you can see this for miles around coming at it. But the people in Laon were particularly grateful. If you wonder how they ever built those things that high, how did they get all those stones and things up there? They had these bulls that they brought the things up, huh? And so the people decided to honor the bulls, and so they've got bulls sticking out of all the corners of the cathedral. It's funny, the way in almost every European cathedral, they do something cute, to inject a human element into the worship of the divine. Okay. And there's, see, Rue des Frères, and there's one of them.
I think I
It was
get
in
it.
an earlier incarnation. And there is the brother who took me around, Law, and that's the monument to Père Marquette. Remember, he was a relative of the founder. Now this is the shrine of Our Lady of Liesse after they made their first vows, and this was kind of the Lourdes of its day in France, and so it's not terribly imposing, but it's still a center of devotion. And there's the tympanum. They come in joy, and they offerenter laetitia aducenter in. They are led into the temple, and they are bearing their gifts in joy. And notice the fleur-de-lis, okay, the royal family. And there's the interior of the sanctuary. One of those black virgins, they're very common, these statues of Our Lady that are all blackened somehow or other. They're all over France, actually. Now, if you look to the left to see the stained glass window, there's the stained glass window put there in 1934 to commemorate what they thought was the 200th anniversary of the first General Assembly, which they presumed was in 1684. So in 1984, 1934, the 250th anniversary of the first assembly. As I said, in 1986, we decided that 86 was the year. This is the entrance. So from Reims, the founder, after everything gets settled, he goes to Paris. And he goes to the parish of Saint-Sulpice. This is the modern church. And what was left of the ancient church was incorporated into the Lady Chapel, which is right behind here, and that would have been there in the founder's time. If you go immediately to the right as you enter Saint-Sulpice there, let's go. There's an enormous, there's a rather large chapel devoted to St. John Baptist de La Salle. And somewhere along the line in showing these slides, I lost the slide that I had of the inscription that's here. But the inscription is an inscription in French which says, this is St. John Baptist de La Salle, who lived in this parish as a model seminarian and who established three schools, gratuitous schools, for the education of youth in the Rue Princesse, the Rue de Bac, and the Rue Placide. And this is the Rue Princesse, and this is the building. Right? It's all shops down beneath here and so on, but this was the building of the Rue Princesse where the founder first took over the school from Campagnon. There's another picture of it, trying to get an angle of it. I wanted that previous one to get to the corner with the identification. A little better idea. A couple of the brothers have been able to get in there and go through the rooms, but they haven't been able. Now that's a 19th century painting of the monks at Vaugirard. And here's what Vaugirard looks like today.
Oh, dear.
Here's the site of Vaugirard. And it's now a boutique du confort, which is quite a difference from the description we get in Blanc anyway. And I presume that the snow and the wind and the rain do not come through those apartment windows up above. Okay. There's another, see how tall that apartment thing is there. That's Vaugirard today. See Rue de Vaugirard. And that's the location. This is the Rue Placide. This is where the first vandalism took place. It was located here on this corner. And it's right down the street from there is Rue de Sèvres. This is Rue de Sèvres. Rue Saint-Placide, Rue de Sèvres. Okay? This is where the Grand Maison was. This is the Rue de Vaugirard, and the Grand Maison was located right here. Nothing left of it, of course. They have since widened all these boulevards in Paris and so on. And so I'm sure if the ghost of Sister St. Fiacre ever came back, she wouldn't know where the hell she was. She may still be flitting around someplace underneath the pavement there. It's hard to tell. All right. This is Chartres, where Bishop Godet de Marais is there. All of the, again, fantastic Gothic cathedral. What a wonderful cathedral this is to visit. I can't take time to say any more about it. This is the Archbishop's Palace, which is now again a museum. Of course, all these things were confiscated during the Revolution. So this is where Godet de Marais would have received de La Salle on several occasions, where he kept him prisoner for dinner on one occasion. Okay, and that's the chapel in there where the founder might quite possibly have said mass and visiting the bishop, although they didn't celebrate in those days. Now this is the site of the Bastille. Here's where the Bastille was. Right to the left here is where we have the School of the Franc Bourgeois. And this monument commemorates the fall of the Bastille on that site. And the Faubourg Saint-Antoine is just beyond in this direction. And this street that comes in here is the Rue, the Boulevard du Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Okay. This is Darnétal. This is the church, which was there when the founder, and the pastor who brought him up there, what was his name? Is Hay. And this is the location where the school was. It's now a bank. Of course, it's not the same building. The outside Rouen. This is a gratuitous school. Now this brother, what's his name? Oh damn, I forget his name all the time. Something Amel or something like that. He took me all over. He was in the French resistance during the war and everything like that. He went to our school in Rouen. He joined the brothers. He taught in the school. He became the director of the school and so on. And now he spends part of his time taking people around on guided tours. And otherwise, 3 times a week, he commutes down to Paris to do catechetical work. And this is a gratuitous school for poor children. It's not on the site where the school was at that time, but it's in Darnétal, and in a certain sense, it's the successor of that school. It's an elementary school, very modest appointments inside, wooden floors and all that. They're kind of creaky, and little kids running around, boys and girls together and so on. And the monks leading very simple lives here, still doing the same work. Okay, and there's the hôpital. There's the hospice from which de La Salle, from which Adrien Niel came, and then that's where the brothers lived, and that's where they had to take care of all of those poor people morning, noon, and night, and so on and so forth. But this is where he got a foothold in Rouen itself. It's now some kind of they use it to help for doctors and nurses. There's a cafeteria and things in there. No admittance signs all over the place, which never bothered this man one bit. So we can't go in there. He said, oh, what do you mean we can't go in there? This is Lasallian territory. And so we move all around, and then people start pursuing us and wondering what we were, what we were doing. And we always managed to escape just in time. No wonder I didn't wind up in jail at this trip. This is the Saint-Maclou, where the first of the schools was opened outside the hôpital. And this leads into the cemetery area, which then became the school. Okay, go ahead. And there, see, all the decorations, you can't see them too well, but they're all skulls and crossbones and things. And the founder himself probably taught school here when he substituted for some of the brothers, who, remember, they were all getting sick and so on and so forth. And there's one of his disciples down below, and the founder looking out of the window up there. There's, right in the corner, since this was being used as a cemetery, there's still, they have it enclosed in glass. They got the cornerstone, and they took the outer covering off of the damn thing. And apparently in those days it was the custom to bury a cat in the cornerstone. Huh? And so as the cat suffocated, the cat got frozen into the most violent kind of, yeah, like this. And so for all eternity, there's that cat, you know. But of course the idea was to scare away the evil spirits. It's now used as a school for fine arts. Okay. Now this is the famous statue of the founder that was put together by subscription, and this is in front of the property of St. Jan. The property is a triangular-shaped property. This would be the base of the triangle. And of course those buildings are relatively modern, and it belongs to the state, and they're not too anxious to let you in there. Interesting story about that statue. Originally it was in the main square, and it was put up in the main square in Rouen in 1888 for the beatification. I can never remember how to pronounce the Folguer, is it, Gus? What's the name? Is that correct? And he designed the statue, and it's all in bronze. It used to be in the main square of the town. But when the brothers in the anti-clerical movement in 1904, the people said, we don't want this priest in the middle of our town. We're finished with all of that. Let's get rid of him. So they were going to destroy the statue, but so the partisans of the brothers said, oh, no, you can't do that to John Baptist de La Salle. So let's put him in a less prominent place, put him on the other side of the river, in front of St. John, where he spent so much of his time. So the city fathers agreed to, okay, as long as he's not the first thing people see when they come into Rouen. And it was fortunate because where it had been standing was absolutely leveled to the ground during World War II. Towards the end of the war, the Germans were running short of ammunition and everything, so they finally gave orders to go all through France, all through occupied France, and find any statues that they could that were made of bronze or any materials that could be useful for the war effort, and destroy them. So they came to this one, and the Nazis got the local people, they erected scaffolding and everything. So when the word got around what they were about to do, the people said, you can't take him away from us. They said, we got orders from that, you know. So they said, well, we'll see about orders. So they brought them their meals every day. So they put soap in their soup and so on and so forth. And then they got an awful attack with the runs and everything else. And so they kept getting delays and delays. And the Nazis were wondering, what's happening to that statue in Rouen? And so it was they were just about ready to make the final effort when the Allies came along and the statue was saved. Okay. This is the Rue de Baroulière. During the famine of 1709, previous to that, the founder had bought this for the brothers in the Rue Princesse to be a better home with the garden and all that sort of stuff. But here's where he had to bring the novices during the time of famine, and they stayed there until 1715, until he brought them back to St. John again. And all that Paris did for the 300th anniversary of the birth of the founder, instead of, they changed the name from the Rue de la Boulière to the Rue Saint-Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. So they named this little street, and it's right directly opposite the Brothers Center at Rue de Sèvres. Okay, this is the Carmelite convent where the founder went every once in a while for a prolonged retreat where old Chétardy thought he was out of town and tried to take over the institute. This is also, of course, where Blessed Solomon was imprisoned during the French Revolution and where he was martyred. And in the back, you can go to a garden there. I have slides of all of that. They're not in this set. When they came up out of the cellar and they shot them all dead, there's a big, that stairway, that balcony is kind of still there, and it says, here's where they fell. Okay? Now this is the Rue de Bac. And so this is where the school was, right on the corner here. And see, it's right next to the Royal Bridge, Le Pont Royal. And so the founder got out of bed one morning to make an early trip across to Saint Honoré on the other side of the Seine. Okay, so let's follow him across the bridge, the Pont Royal, see, which was built in 1689. This is probably 1707, and with his arthritic knee and everything else. Okay, but of course it was pitch dark at that time. And right here would be the gate where the gate to the Tuileries was, and he fell and stumbled onto an underground spike there, and he had to crawl across. Okay, let's go across. And he went past. Now the Eiffel Tower wasn't there, and he wouldn't have looked at that statue, but it's all part of the garden. And he finally wound up at St. Roch, and fell into the arms of a brother exhausted and unconscious. Okay. Now this is the Cathedral of St. Denis, one of the earliest French Gothics. Marvelous example. Look at all the fine buttresses and so on. Okay. This is the facade. See, it's only got one tower. Chartres has two, and the second one is a late one. The simple one on the right is the one that everybody thinks is the best tower in Chartres. I should have pointed that out before. Okay. And that's where he gets into trouble. All right, now we got through that one on time. Now let's go south. Okay. And we arrive in Lyon. There's three of them there lined up. Okay. And we go from Lyon to Avignon. Let's go to Avignon first. It's still a walled city. The walls of the papal city of Avignon are still almost perfectly intact. Okay. There's the papal palace. That's the palace of the popes. The cardinals didn't like to live there. They thought it was too gloomy, so they all their places across the street. Okay. And there's the banquet hall of the Papal Palace. It's being restored to its original. They could accommodate 1,000 people in here at one sitting. And on the other side of this is a great big enormous kitchen with a vent up and so on and so forth, and they trot in with the with all their fancy things. You know why why is the main meal called an entree? A lot of people think, why don't we call the appetizer the entree?
Because they carried it in? when they
Yes,
served
yes,
it?
and in these big banquets, when the main course was about to be served, they'd have music by Jean-Baptiste Lully, perhaps, or some one of those, or who's the one who did the masterpiece theater music, Moret, and so then all of the waiters would come in and they'd have these big trays with stuffed birds and stuffed animals and everything, and it was a grand entrance with the main course, so that's why it's called the entree. Oh, you learn everything, all sorts of things from this. This is a little small chapel in the Papal Palace, and those frescoes date from the 14th century when the popes actually lived there. Okay? I don't have slides here of the papal rooms where the Pope lives, but there isn't a sign of any religious decoration on those walls at all. The frescoes are all birds and animals and fishes and dancing girls. This is the famous Pont d'Avignon. Here's the Rhone River, and here's where the cardinals all had their houses across the street. Philip and also Philip the Fair had one too. He was the one who brought sponsored all those French cardinals. There's the site of the original school where the brothers were in 1703. Okay, and right near the Archbishop's place. That tower is the Church of St. Augustine. It's all that's left of the church, but that's the church where the founder said Mass when he was in Avignon. And the printer that printed all the original editions out of Avignon, it was nice to do it in Avignon because you got the papal approval on the imprimaturs and all that stuff. And so the printer is still in existence, au Venero. Now this is Marseille. This is a kind of an overview of the whole Horseshoe Harbor, taken from up above. That's the new harbor over here. Here's the horseshoe thing right here. All these yachts from the Mediterranean. I guess there must have been about 500 yachts there, maybe more, berthed. Oh. There's the Church of Saint Laurent, where we had the school in Marseille. Right, you'll see how close it is to the water. See, there it is. And here's going out, took a little trip across to the deep. And there's the St. Lawrence Church. And there's Notre Dame de la Garde. The founder took his novices up there on pilgrimages from time to time. When I was up there, they were having a confirmation ceremony, and they had a tape recording of Handel's Messiah, the Alleluia chorus of all things. And these excursion boats go out, so I took one of those to get some of these views. That's the cathedral. It's the new cathedral, known as the Major. There were four. Now this is all today's stuff we're into now. So we'll talk about it in the next hour. But there were four major divisions in the city: the Yacul, St. Martin, I forget the other one, and the cathedral parish, which was called Mayor or Major. This is a statue still today of Bishop Belsunce, who did so much for the city. This is the new cathedral. There was a different one there in the founder's time, part of which exists. Next. And this is the old cathedral, and this is what the founder would have known. Okay? And this is the Archbishop's palace. It's now the headquarters for the police. Even today in Marseille, when they say, well, where's your Uncle Harry? They'll say, Uncle Harry is down with the Archbishop, which means he's in jail. So the founder would have gone up here to visit the bishop on any number of occasions, and on one occasion he went to say goodbye to him because he was departing from Rome. Next slide, please. And when he came out of the door, there would be the ship right down the street. This is, if you stood at the doorway to the bishop's house, there's the port right there. And of course it didn't get very far. The bishop said, oh no, we got to try and get you into a new school. And so that's when he cracked the only joke in his life, when he came home to the brothers and said, here I am back from Rome. This is what's left of the church of the parish of the Yacul, Notre Dame des Yacul. And Poutet thinks that it was the pastor of that parish that began to turn the attitude of the people in Marseille against the founder and the founder's way of trying to run the schools. had very little to do with Jansenism problem. So discouraged and blaming only himself, the founder decided, well, he'd better get out of town, and here's where he experiences the dark night of the soul. This is a bohm. A bohm are these kind of chalk cliffs. They surround Marseille all over, and this one was known as the Santa Bohm. They pronounce that final E, by the way, with their southern accent, Santa Bohm, they say. And up there, right there, that sort of black spot, that's where, was the center of pilgrimage. According to legend, that's where Mary Magdalene came to make penance for her sins. And over the centuries, popes and bishops and kings and everything else have made pilgrimages there, and that's where De La Salle spent those couple of months. Okay. And there's the brother, Jean-Paul Castel, I think his name was, the director of the community in St. Bruno in Marseille, who was taking me around it. So we decided to go up there. It takes about 45 minutes or an hour to climb up there. It was my younger days. There we are climbing up through this very foresty stuff. There's what it looks like as you're approaching it. That's a slide, I believe. It's not my own. And then when you finally get up to the top of the thing, almost exhausted, there you get into this, which is now a shrine. And that's what it looks like. Here's where those first pictures were taken from, down here, so you get some idea. You see these bones all around. So you see how high up you are. Okay. Now, can you go back a couple, Mike, please? Yeah. There. One of the questions is, did the founder spend the 40 days up here in this retreat? Well, some of the authors think that no, he stayed down in the monastery of St. Maximin, down on the valley floor. So it's disputed, but whether he was up here or down there. Didn't change his underwear for 40 days, one of the biographers said. Well, anyway, it could well have been up here because there is a Dominican monastery here, and that was there at that time. It's not awfully large, but it would be possible for a pilgrim to come there and to stay for a retreat time. So it's perfectly possible that he was up here all that time. Okay, this makes a better story if he wasn't. So this is inside. This is inside the big cave. Huh? Now you can see there's a sizable altar there. So I thought he was a Dominican lay brother. Turns out he was the resident priest who was mopping the floor, getting ready to say Mass about a half an hour later. Okay? And there's a plaque on the wall that says what's there. Overcome by all sorts of trials and persecuted by the Jansenists for his attachment to the Roman faith, St. John Baptist de La Salle, founder of the Brothers in the Christian Schools, organizing of teaching for the people in France, proclaimed the patron of Christian teachers on the 15th of May 1950, came in 1713 to gather his forces together at the Santa Bohm, and in a long retreat of 40 days to recover his strength for the service of God and youth. And there's Mary Magdalene on the rocks. Brochure de la Pénitence, all right? It's a statue from the 18th century. Now, down below in the monastery of St. Maximin, a very large monastery, really, this is the shrine of Mary Magdalene. And this reliquary behind here supposedly has Mary Magdalene's skull. Now, it's possible she did get over there, by the way, that the route from Palestine across to Marseille would have been possible for Lazarus and Mary and Martha, maybe to escape persecution or something, to come over this far. And some of the documentary evidence for this, or the evidence of a cult, goes back as early as 200 A.D. So you're getting pretty back to the source. Anyway, in that reliquary, there's supposedly the skull of Mary Magdalene. Now the problem is, something like St. Luke, there's another skull someplace else, which of course is no problem because one was the skull of Mary Magdalene as a young woman and the other is skull of Mary Magdalene. Go ahead. This is Les Vents, V-A-N-S, sometimes spelled V-E-N-T-S, Les Vents, and this is where the brother school was. This is where the Huguenots physically attacked them. There was a big riot there on one occasion. Probably not as big as Blain says it was, or as a Blair, my affair. But at any rate, they were easily attacked here, and right dead in the middle of the city. There's another picture of it.
Is that the actual building?
It's the actual building. Okay? And this is Gravière. Now, here's where you can see a little bit of what the territory is like in the Gévaudan. This was my guide, Brother Robert Comte, the theologian in Saint-Étienne over there, and he was a very fine guy. And this is the Volkswagen we were driving around in, and this is outside the, I don't think that's it. This is the church, and there you can get an idea of, here we are down in this sort of gully, huh? But to get here, we had to come all the way down, zigzagging the road down here, and then go all the way up at the other side, and we had to do that about 4 or 5 times, and so did the founder when he would be going on this route. This Gravière is right next to Les Bains. The founder went there because this was the priest who sponsored the school and made the first negotiations, and so he stayed with him for a couple of days. Okay, and this is the actual church where the founder would have been, and it was Ascension Thursday that day. And so they were saying Mass, having Mass, okay. And it's in the sacristy where this famous portrait is of the founder, supposedly in secular dress, which of course Brother Augustine explained that last night. And on the side wall is this famous painting of the founder saying his first Mass, surrounded by Roland and all of his family. Of course, this wouldn't stand up under historical investigation. Now we're coming into Mende. Now see, here we are on top of one of these this big plateau, and we're coming down into the city. Here's where the present Brother School is, here, and here's the cathedral that was very badly damaged in the fighting with the Huguenots. Okay, all right. There's the site of the first school in Avignon in 1707, set up by Bishop Piencourt. That's the front of it, and that's the back of it. It's the original building. Okay. You can go inside. That's the house of Mademoiselle Lescure, where the founder stayed with her for 2 months after he got thrown out of the brother's house, and after the Capuchins, he stayed with the Capuchins for a week, and she rescued him, and she was trying to get an organization of ladies together. And notice that they couldn't think of founding a religious order, but they wanted to lead a life according to rule, and so he helped her. In between lunch and dinner sometime, when of course, if you get cynical about this, Rose and some of them will insist, well, she had a house big enough, and she had an adjacent house, and that's where the founder stayed. They weren't under the same roof, etc. Well, today we don't really care too much about that. Now, when she tries to persuade him to stay, and she's willing to set up him for the rest of his life in the schools, and the founder is in all of this business. He's trying to make up his mind at this time, whether to stay hidden, to stay in the South, what to do and so on. But no, he decides after Timothy's visit that the brothers really want him at least back in Grenoble, so he has to go back again. So there, see, there's the plateau up there. Here we are down here in Mende, and so she gives him her horse. And here's the route he would have had to take up. Now, of course, he came in there by foot. And this is his second visit probably, and so it gives you a very good idea of the type of terrain that he had to travel down there in the south. And of course, it was tough enough getting up there with the car. Then at this point, the road converges into where this cross that would have been there in the founder's time. This is a little brother who is guiding me around. I've had some correspondence with him every once in a while since then. In one of the letters, De La Salle refers to the little brother from Mende, and I was happy to find that he is still living. Okay. And now we are in Grenoble, and this is the Church of Saint Andre, where Yves de Sallian and Claude Canel were canons of the chapter there. Okay, and remember this is the Isère River, give you an idea of the mountains around Grenoble. And the brother's house is right behind, the brother's house and school is right in the block behind this riverfront section. And there's the building. Plaque above says John Baptist de La Salle taught school there. That was not the school, however, that was the brother's house. and all very concrete and so on. There's a very wild dog in the older thing, and Leo Burkhart was taking me around Grenoble here for this trip. Go ahead. And so this is looking up to the upper levels and so on with these balconies coming over. So I didn't want to argue with the dog, but fortunately he was behind the thing. Now this is a little hole in the wall that they talk about all the time. Burkhart told me that they have an awful lot of trouble with tramps and so on going up there and using it, and so it isn't clean. It wasn't clean when we were there. There is a cleaned up picture taken of this thing that's in the Brothers set, but this is the way it was when I was there. And supposedly there's where the founder slept. But there's a kind of a room, and it's not so terribly small, but it's very difficult to get to. In that Brothers set, there's a picture of the very, very narrow stairway going up. It really is an anchorite place inside this house. But on the other hand, if you looked out the window, that was the view he had, which isn't bad. Certainly got plenty of fresh air, though. No window in that thing. Now this is the Church of Saint Laurent, right? In Grenoble, and this is where the founder taught school, and this is where he would have taken the kids 2 by 2 to celebrate Mass for them there, right? And of course, kids in those days were just like kids in our day, you know, and here's a 17th century relic that's still there on the side of the wall. How's your French? Now we're going to the Grande Chartreuse. Now, the scenery here is just absolutely spectacular and magnificent. Both Blanc and Meyerbeer try to portray this as a woeful, terrible desert where St. Bruno went and all that sort of stuff. Well, baloney, you know, it's really... Now, there's the Grande Chartreuse. Right? This is, now, this is their monastery. This is the 17th century. St. Bruno wasn't there at his time. But this is what would have been there in the founder's time. This features in the film, of course, and they do not allow people to go up there anymore. There are all sort of signs saying no entry. They have a visitors, the old infirmary has been turned into a visitor center, but they don't want any tourists coming up this way. But Burkhart says, what the hell, we'll go up there anyway. He said, I used to be friends with the abbot before he was the abbot, and he was very good. He said I could go in there any time, and he treated me nice, and he gave me chartreuse, bottles of it, and all that sort of stuff. But he said now that he's the abbot, he says he's unbearable, and he won't talk to me, and he says I can never get in there illegally. So again, we almost got arrested here because he drove all around, but he wanted me to get this, to have this view, this overview of the whole thing. Next. Now, here you can see the monks lived in these cells. Each one had a duplex, an upstairs and a downstairs. And the upstairs, you can see they're rather commodious. They're all separated from one another, so each one had a garden that he could have. These buildings were used by the abbots when they would come for a general chapter for their suite, for their entourage. Their horses and their drivers and their servants and all the rest of it. So, but they themselves, the monks who were here in the Grande Chartreuse, each one would have one of these units. Right? And they come together once or twice a week. Okay. There was a big avalanche at one time. It is true that they get snowbound. Parmeny, which is right next to this, is, Jared tells me that the brothers, the novices, the French novices were snowbound in there for 10 days this past winter. One time there was a big avalanche and they built this shrine to Our Lady and there hasn't been an avalanche ever since. And that's supposed to be exactly 1,000 meters above sea level. Okay? And there's the entrance to the place. There's the famous scene in the movie where the Carthusian opens the door, and that's Burkhart's cameo appearance in the film. And that's a slide of the corridor, the length of the thing, and the monk cells would be off. And see here, I don't know, those are windows, but on each monk's cell there's a door where the lay brothers will put the meal for the man 3 times a day, and then there's a table for him to have his meals. There's a prie-dieu to say his prayers, a bed to go to sleep in, and the library shelves for his books. And then underneath, each monk cultivates his own hobby. Some of them do bookbinding, some of them do sewing and tapestry work, and so on. Okay. And each has a little stove. Of course, this is where the Chartreuse liquor gets its name from. they've kept the formula to themselves fairly secret, although somebody bootlegged the formula at one time, around the time of the French Revolution. But they have the copyright on this, and one or two of the monks, at least at the time I was there, were still coming here every day to supervise the operation, something like our own winery. Whether or not they've sold it to Hoyt-Line, I don't know. Now, there's Parmeny. Huh? Now, when they talk about this being way up on top of the big high mountain, well, there it is. It's about the same. It's about as big as these taller mountains surrounding the campus here. And that's coming from Grenoble towards Parmeny, and Parmeny is up on top of that hill. So it's not so terribly high. There's the total complex. Here's the chapel, and there's Sister Louise just coming along. See, all these characters seem to come out just when I come along somewhere. These were originally barns that they turned into living quarters, and this is the, now of course Burckhardt put this whole thing together practically single-handed with the help of the local people called Les Amis du Parmeny. Got very little help from the French brothers, who were annoyed as the deuce that Lycée Joseph bought the property in the first place. And so Burckhardt got the money to build it up by renting it out to business organizations to come for commercial meetings or for wedding receptions. And in order to provide the best possible cuisine, he stole the principal chef away from the mother house. And so this is where the dining facilities are. It has since been expanded, I understand, so that they now have accommodations for many more people. And apparently now the district of Central West has taken over the whole, Central East has taken over the whole thing. And they have an initiate for all France there. He put me up in what had been the cow barn. They have a very vicious dog here, but he kind of made friends with him. Anybody who hates dogs and children as much as I do can't be all bad, but anyhow. You see, when Burckhardt was doing this, this was the stall, this was the, where they had the hay for the cows and things during the winter. But, and he couldn't get this block of marble to yield it all, or granite or whatever it is, so he decided to make a bench out of it. And there's a bed and a little shower there, so it's comfortable enough. There's the chapel in Parmeny. The altar, let's go to the next one. The altar, this was originally the bottom step of the altar. So when De La Salle said Mass here, and he was chaplain here with Sister Louise for at least a 30-day period, he would have stood on that as he ascended the altar to say Mass. And so Burckhardt, when he reconstructed this place, put that together. If you look in Encounters, there's a picture of what it looked like before he got busy at it. There's Sister Louise in the back, trying to whisper, telling the founder what to pray for. And Burckhardt discovered a grave underneath the floor, huh? And so he had this slab put here. He describes the day he was looking. He knew that she and one of the chaplains was buried under the floor, and so when he was doing the cleaning up operation, he went there one day and he said, all of a sudden, he said, the sun just came straight through the upper window and hit right down in this thing, and there were the bones of Sister Louise. And so he put that there. So here's where the founder gets the order to return. And he goes back by way of Lyon. That's the Lyon Cathedral, where the general councils of Lyons were held in the 14th century, 1300. 13th century. Thomas Aquinas died in 1274 on the way to the Council of Lyon. Everywhere, if you look out the door of the cathedral, that's the present shrine to Our Lady. There was a famine in the 19th century, and everywhere in France there's a major shrine to Our Lady, almost always on top of the highest hill. And so that's the one in Lyons. So the founder, Glenn tells us, came to venerate the relic of Francis de Sales. And this was the Visitation Convent. That's all that's left of it. And that's where the Francis de Sales had his heart. The rest of them was back in Geneva. That seemed to be a big thing. They bury your heart where your heart, you leave your heart in San Francisco or someplace. And so he left his heart in Lyon. But then they have since put them all back together in one piece. He got his act together. Got his body together. But anyway, the founder would have stopped here. Okay. It may be a trifle. This is the Church of St. Nicholas de Chardonnay in Paris, where they had a very good educational program, as we saw, even before the founder's time. This is where Roland would have stayed at one time. And the founder, towards the end of his life, as we'll see tomorrow, the founder spent several months here and wanted to die here and retire here and get away from the brothers altogether. But Bartholomew managed to get him back. That's for tomorrow. There's the death of the founder in a stained glass window in a church of St. John Baptiste de La Salle in Paris. It's right near where Vaugirard used to be. It's the only church in Paris named after the founder, the only parish. There is the building, this is for tomorrow again. The brothers built this chapel to house the relics of the founder, but his relics didn't rest in peace because, of course, they were vandalized during the French Revolution. Next. This is all St. Jan. That's the back of the chapel that they built, so you have some idea of the size of it. And it's adjacent to where the old prison used to be when the brothers had it. And again, there was no entry here, but this brother got me in. There's that famous statue. We saw that already. Right? And that picture of the brother standing behind the chapel, that's where the cemetery was, where they buried all the old superiors. So when they were able to recover some of them, a lot of the early superior generals are buried here. Here's Brother Timothy, for example. And Irenae is here. And so they moved him to a new cemetery up on overlooking the Seine in Rouen. And this brother was showing me around. He had a lot of connections with the alumni, and they built this for the brothers, and they transplanted whatever relics they could of all of these earlier superior generals. And he said he wanted to make sure they built it big enough so there'd be room for him up here when he dies, which he may have since. But then, at the time of the beatification, the brothers in France built this enormous basilica just to house the relics of the founder. And this is the school that was opened in 1880, and it's still there, right? And in the apse of this enormous basilica, which is still a school, as you can see, that's where they had the relics. But when the brothers were expelled from France in 1904, they moved the relics to Lembec. So the founder did not really rest in peace. Huh? And then when they moved the mother house to Rome, they had to sort of sneak the relics out of France to begin with. And Rouen was screaming, "We want the relics back here, that we built this whole church for them, they belong here." The superior said, "No, the founder goes with the mother house. The founder stays with the superior general." So they said, "Well, here, we'll send you a bone." So they sent him an arm or something to keep them quiet. There's the brother, the Christian schools. That's the school of St. John Baptiste de La Salle in Rouen, present-day Rouen. And there's the mother house before its conversion. It's not a very good picture. They took this in 1978, I guess, but you still have the old back altar and one sort of facing, and this fresco of John Baptiste de La Salle offering everybody up to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, well, at the time of the tercentenary, Pablo changed all that. Next. He converted the whole chapel around. So we get John Baptiste de La Salle ascending into heaven instead of what had been there in the center as a mosaic, which they covered over, I guess. The American brothers, when they first unveiled this, noticed the finger of the right hand pointing towards heaven, but it was a certain amount of ambiguity as to which finger it was. And when they all started kind of tittering about it, and the superiors got wind of it, they panicked, really, and they readjusted all the lighting so it would be perfectly clear that he's pointing the index finger up. This is the present-day sanctuary. Here's where the mother house community sits around for their prayers. That's one advantage because they're all around in the circle. Now, so of course the American brothers contributed to a beautiful side chapel to where the relics of the founder were kept for years and years, as long as they were in the mother house. And the Americans paid to have a beautiful chapel decorated with stained glass windows and everything else, and so on and so forth. But for the tercentenary, they decided to do what they never should have done, and they decided to put them in the sanctuary itself. This is the reliquary of the founder, with the signature underneath, huh? And this with a red lamp and so on. This is the tabernacle with the Blessed Sacrament. It's supposed to be something like the burning bush or something. It's got all kind of Christmas tree lights in it. But this is gold and a red lamp and everything. And of course, any number of people go up there and genuflect before the relics because they think it's the tabernacle. And during the last general chapter, on one occasion, they had a priest in to say Mass, and sure enough, at communion time, doesn't he go over and he's trying to find how to open the tab. So John Baptist de La Salle, at the end of his life, winds up on the shelf. What else? Next. There he is.
Ah, there he is.
Okay. Let's go and have our pictures taken now. And maybe someday somebody will make a slide. If we got tourist permanent accommodations in Reims, it'd probably be a lot cheaper than Paris, huh? But Rummery has some contacts from the Seoul. All that's being worked out. But you could really do the Lasallian Paris in one day. Huh? Now, if we want to be serious about a Lasallian thing and forget the Folie Bergère and all the rest of the attractions in Paris, if it's your first time there. So maybe a day, day and a half in Paris. You can certainly do Reims in a day, the essence of it anyway. Of course, you can't get out to the countryside and Brouilly and all that. Maybe we could. And then Rouen, certainly in a day. And a lot of that could be done in a walking trip. So one day at each of those places. Then go take the train, that fast train down to Lyon, and go have a bus bring us from there to Parmeny. Spend maybe 2 days in Parmeny, Grenoble, Grand Chartreuse thing. And then take a bus and stop somewhere in between for lunch and get to Mons. Hit Saugues on the way, because that's that same territory, and see the Benilde thing. Get to Mons, stay overnight at Mons, then back to Avignon. Pull up in Avignon and do Marseille out of Avignon. And then maybe fly back to the States, possibly from the south someplace, because they have connections. So it could be done in 10 days, without too often. Did everybody sign the card for Andrew? Frank did not.
Oh, sorry there, Gus.
Okay, all right. Now, have you got that sheet that I gave yesterday with the map of Paris, with the map of France down at the bottom? Okay, so here's the sequence. So this, just to get ourselves, now this, we're covering here basically a period of a little more than 2 years. The 1711 date's there. That's the first trip that he made, and then he comes back to deal with the Clément affair, leaves the stuff in the hands of his lawyer, sees that he's about to be condemned. So from 1712 in February 18th, he leaves Paris. That date is fixed, I think, it has something to do with the way Lent was falling. And now the question is, what route did he take? We don't really know, but he may well have gone first to Loes, or maybe Mons, then to Gravière, and then, or Gravière and Mons, one way or the other, and Les Vins, and then he finally gets to Marseille. And of course, that's where we have the problem. These are the problem areas. So what was going on at Marseille, and why was there such a sudden change in the attitude towards the founder and the brothers? That's the first question we have to. He thought of going to Rome from Marseille, but he didn't. The novitiate opens, he gets faculties for confessions and preaching and so on. Everything's going fine through the rest of that year, 1712. By 1713, sometime in March, the whole thing has changed around. And all of a sudden, this opposition has developed. So he goes to the Santa Baume and possibly St. Maximin and experiences the dark night of the soul. You have an idea now visually of what that place was like. Then he goes, from there he goes over to Mons. He's not welcome at the brother's place for one reason or another. Then to the Capuchins, and then to Mademoiselle Lescour. Then Timothy comes to visit him there. The novitiate has closed. Timothy had been the director of novices, and Timothy comes looking for a new assignment. And that's where the founder is so discouraged, and he says, the brothers don't really want me. However, Timothy persuades him that, yes, he is so wanted, so he goes to Grenoble, but there again, he still lives in a kind of a retired situation. However, he's still interested enough in what's going on to send Brother Jacques to Paris to find out what's going on up there, and he replaces them in class and takes the kids to that church of St. Lawrence, where one of them scribbled a graffito on the outside of the church door. He makes the retreat at the Grand Chartreuse. Over the winter, he has another attack of rheumatism. After he begins to convalesce, he's looking for a place to make a retreat. Parmeny is recommended. He goes there. This big question of how long, if you read Henri my affair, you'd think he was only there for 2 weeks. But there's a lot of other evidence that indicates he was there much longer. On April the 1st, the brothers in Paris say, but the whole thing is falling apart. We command you in virtue of the vow to come back. he doesn't come back right away. There's a long delay, and that's another one of the problems. Why did it take him so long? Well, an awful lot has been made lately about this command to return and his obedience to the body of the society, but it certainly, if it was blind obedience, it certainly was not prompt, which is one of his own characteristics, because it wasn't until August the 10th, which is some months later, that he finally gets back and he says, "Here I am, what do you want me to do?" And then he refuses to do anything. But, and that's for tomorrow. But, so that's the sequence to have in mind, all right, and it's all summarized for you there. So now, I presume you've read Blanc, his account of the thing, and if you've read Encounters, I don't have anything more to say except what I'm saying here in conjunction with Burckhardt. This started off as a translation of Burckhardt after my first visit to Parmeny in 1982, I think it was. But then with this whole question of our increasing awareness of the importance of this, and Gus and myself having an internecine feud where I was trying to say the founder was ready to quit and give up, and Gus was saying, no, all the evidence is that he was still interested in the brothers. So this turns into a modified version.
Okay. He wants it tonight.
Yes. So,
Great coincidence that this is the topic I'm talking about.
right tonight, yeah. So you can choose between Blab, Burckhardt, Loes, and Salm. You'll have a variety. So there are lots of problems. And of course, one of the problems with Battersby is Battersby would never even go to Parmeny. He didn't think it was important, and he passes it over very quickly. This is the second Lasallian thing that I produced, by the way, and I was since the first one was beginnings, I was almost tempted to call this one endings. So my own interest in Lasallian studies started with the beginnings in Reims, then I got fascinated with Parmeny at the end, and then since then I filled in all the stuff in between. So it's kind of a way to go about this. So, all right, so let's talk about these things one after the other. Let's talk about Marseille, first of all. Now, I haven't got much more to say except what's here. But does anybody want to? Frank?
Are you inclined to rule out in Marseille Jansenism as one of the main troublemakers?
Yes.
Did I hear you correctly?
Yes. Yves Poutet has convinced me of that. And first of all, if we're talking about 1711, 12, 13, the Bull Unigenitus was not issued until late in 1713, and it wasn't issued from Rome, and it wasn't promulgated in France until early in 1714, right? And although there probably were some Jansenist influences there, they were not major. Poutet has done an awful lot of research on these various French societies, and he thinks that it's the Company of the Blessed Sacrament, which was founded out of Lyon, and was very much influenced by the policies of Charles Damien. That was the dominant influence. And this Company of the Blessed Sacrament, it was almost like a kind of a secret society. And they had penetrated Marseille very deeply. So they had established a bureau of the schools. And so they were in charge of the schools, this Company of the Blessed Sacrament. They were, and they also had a bureau of the poor. And it was a kind of reform movement, one of these ways of trying to implement the decisions of the Council of Trent and to get a reformed version of Catholicism going in these cities in France. And so they were very much influenced by the Damien position that they ought to have schools for the poor, and they ought to get the sisters. They had Barré's sisters in Marseille, but then that the boys ought to be taught by young seminarians and young clerics, right? And so that was, the Jansenism was probably not, see, Blanc is writing when the Jansenism thing it's on his mind. And of course, all of that comes later. But it was not the major focus here. So the real problem, as I say in the thing there, was probably those two brothers, if you think about it. The school was opened in 1706. Two of them were sent from Avignon to Marseille. Here they ran this very, very successful school. Everybody wanted to send their kids there. The school was a success. The two of them were thriving on the success of the school. They were well liked by the people. They had good contacts with all of the parents and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, along comes De La Salle, opens a novitiate and says, well, now you can begin to observe the rule. Now you can come here, we'll have mental prayer forever. And we can have recreation of rule, and we can have shots on Friday night, and we can have all of these things. And wouldn't that be lovely? And so they go back to the parish and say, look at what that man's doing. He's taking us away from you. You're the one supporting us here and so on, but we can't stay. We can't be relating to you anymore. We can't come to dinner tonight. We have to go over to that stupid novitiate with those young kids. So that undoubtedly was a major factor, and it becomes clear. Oh, one of them is probably the Maydard who goes and over to Mond and creates all the trouble over there. So that's one factor. And the other factor was De La Salle's own policies. They expected that, the bishop wanted to set up schools in the four parishes, and De La Salle was cooperating with that and so on, and there was a certain amount of support, and they supported the novitiate. But then when he made it clear, and of course one of the reasons is that the people from the north didn't understand these southerners, the language. Well, Emily Keyes a few years ago insisted that it was a totally foreign language of the Languedoc. That's discussable how much it was possible for an ordinary French-speaking person to understand the language down in Marseille. But at any rate, they spoke a different language. They had a totally different culture. But the founder wanted the novices, when they finished their novitiate, to be dispensable so that they could be sent anywhere, including possibly Rome, which may be another reason why Roland never got anybody, because the founder was hoping to send him somebody from here. So that was one policy, the fact that he would have control over that these were not novices just for Marseille. The other thing is that he absolutely refused to have the brothers take the tonsure. And most of the wills that were the source of the money had left the money in these foundations for a gratuitous school for boys that would be conducted by an ecclesiastic, because that was the system. So they were really going contrary to the letter they didn't worry about that in the beginning. But especially probably that pastor of the Yacul began to see that the De La Salle approach to running gratuitous schools was very different from the way they conceived of the whole operation, and that he wanted to control it independently. It's the same story that he ran into every place. Huh? And of course then the brothers themselves said to him, what the hell are you doing here? We had it made until you came along. Everything was great. Huh? We were all set to go, and you come and louse up the whole operation with your own stubbornness and your own insistence on these things, and making everybody come to the novitiate, and not letting us take the tonsure, and not keeping the novices here. So that's probably the reason why the opposition. But Blain, of course, carries the story right straight through the end. Once the founder gets out of there, as a matter of fact, the schools did begin to prosper. And by the time Blain is writing, he says that it's one of the most thriving centers of the Institute in France, as he's writing in the 1720s and 30s. Okay? Enough on that? Gabe.
You know when he says here, Campos, in that section on Marseille, he says it's the period where the founder took a prophetic self-examination into his personal carriers of the mission. And as if God were saying, if you leave, it will be consolidated, the work. You go to the hindrance. You see that, again, when somebody writes something like that, to me it touches on kind of an excuse. I'd rather accept your explanation that's more realistic. There were things there that had to be corrected. His presence would disturb people.
Yes.
Because what was going on was forming a parochial system again.
Yes, but I think in that observation, though, that's why I've separated out Saint-Baume. Huh? One thing is, why did, from the point of view of the people of the Marseillaise, remember, what's the French national anthem from the Revolution? La Marseillaise. It was the Marseille people that started it. Okay. So that's why I've separated, however, Marseille, which is why did the people turn against him? Huh? And the Saint-Baume question, once he decides to get out of the way and blame himself, then I think that's what Campos is talking about. So I don't see an incompatibility. So that's the second problem. What was on De La Salle's mind? Was he ready to abandon the whole thing? Now, Blain, of course, says that he had always thought of going to a parish to help or converted sinners. So I think that that thing of Campos is probably pretty good. And of course, what, would he have had a problem leaving the brothers that he had vowed to associate with? And I think Campos very interestingly turns the thing around. Was he leaving the brothers, or had the brothers abandoned him? Or did he perceive it that way anyhow? Huh? Which he must certainly have done. Look at that, well, we'll do it when we come to Mon. But he had that sense of abandonment by the brothers, and if Bland, now of course this dark night of the soul of 40 days may be, again, imposing on the founder something that's classic in spirituality and a sense of abandonment by God, but maybe he felt that way. But there's no doubt that he certainly seemed to be blaming himself for all the trouble. And I think also that famous statement, the work is yours, to put the thing in God's hands, and if God wants it to succeed, it'll succeed. And that the success of it might very well depend on his being willing to give it up. We still talk about one of the things in Lasallian spirituality. Are you ready to let go? Because we want to hang on to things. It's one of the big problems of the brothers. One of the problems you have running the district. Nobody wants to let go of where they are, or what they've been doing, or the things they have, or little toys and so on. We're all caught into that. Don't even want to let go of Buttimer.
This struck me from a plan that almost that he lost his nerve during that time. And present day we would say that he was great, and the institute seemed to be falling apart, and these rumors were that he elected and so on. And it would be so easy just to write to him and say, I'm thinking a year after 2 years after whatever, but you look after the show. But he didn't do that. Things seemed to be just falling down. He didn't seem to be reacting at all to anything.
Oh, well, yeah, if you imagine the sense that he felt when he got that letter from Bartholomew using the, superior Rheims sort of thing, and felt that the brothers in France, the brothers in Paris didn't want him, and then everything's going fine for a while in Marseille, and all of a sudden the thing begins to collapse there. Sure. How much of a mental breakdown, Mike, did you have?
The first brothers who came from the north. Now the brothers that had all the problems with, were they from the north, or were they?
Well, the first two would have come from Avignon, and they would not have come out of the. I'm not sure that he ever got any brothers out of that Avignon novitiate at all, or any that stayed. Gus, do you think so? What do you think? I doubt it. It wasn't. It didn't last long enough, so they all would have had come from up above. Sure, and Matthias and all those people that he's writing. Remember, he's writing to Matthias in Mond, way off there in the corner. Phil?
On page 103, it says, in the third paragraph, as mentioned before, it was a Jesuit who had first launched the idea of this school. That was where the trouble lay.
Well, that's because Blount is trying to build up a case about the Jansenism. See, now there was a Jesuit who gave the retreat talks before the founder arrived there in this parish. It built up a big thing about the need to have schools in all the parishes for these boys. And so, well, the schools were actually founded in each of these parishes in the late 1680s, 1685. I have the dates here someplace from Poutet. But the Jesuits would say we've got to put more emphasis on this, and so there was a climate, all right, to raise up this whole question. But since Blount wants to make the whole Jesuits the heart of the problem, okay, he conceives that there's a secret enemy someplace who wants to get even with the Jesuits who are against Jansenism. See, that's why he gets the Jebbi in there. Because the Jebbis stand for defenders of, and he calls them Molinists sometimes, even though he says that maybe they never even read Molina. But that's the reason for that. Anything else on the founder's attitude of this thing? And so now the question is, when did Timothy come to him? Timothy come to him in the Saint Bon. Mayafer has him come to him in Mond, where he goes over to Mond. So it doesn't make any difference, but the confrontation with Timothy is important. So let's go to Mond if we're finished with that. Okay, now he doesn't get a very good reception in Mond. Those who want to gloss this thing over and make the brothers look pretty good say, well, the reason why they couldn't keep him in the house very long was because they didn't have room. Because there are a fair number of brothers there by this time. But again, some of the word from Paris, it's hard to say why the brothers didn't receive him. Or did they just, were they afraid that he had wrecked things pretty much in Marseille, and possibly that Brother Médard was over there by that time? So anyway, whatever the reason, he goes with the Capuchins to make a retreat for a week, and then this Mademoiselle Lescure rescues him, and he's settled there, and he's not in any hurry to go anywhere. And he even toyed with the idea, and it's probably there where Timothy comes to him looking for a new assignment. And so that confrontation, I think, is worth looking at. Page 116. Now remember, Timothy is the superior general while Blan is writing this. So this is, I have it the other way around. Blan has him come to Amand, and that's the reason for it, because Timothy, he would have known Timothy. Bottom of 115. After the pious founder had spent some time at the hermitage we mentioned, he retired to another solitary place in the city of Mans. There, far from men's eyes, the servant of God believed people were thinking of him as little as he thought of them. He was persuaded they had forgotten him. He was not a little surprised when the brother director to whom he had entrusted the new novitiate came to meet him in this new solitude. If I had 3 hours to show the slides, I have a picture of where that novitiate was in Marseille, of which Timothy had been in charge. You only got about 1/3 or 1/4 of my slide collection this morning. Aren't you glad? Somebody once said that there's the only difference between a good photographer and a bad photographer is that a good photographer throws away all of his bad pictures. The good photographer only keeps the ones that come out, and come out well. De La Salle's departure had hastened this failure of the novitiate, and so on his enemies. Now, on the next page, the news did not surprise John Baptist that the novitiate had collapsed. What amazed him was that anyone should still think of him. Like a man convinced that his memory had faded from the earth, he replied, "God be blessed." Now, so here's Timothy asking for a sign. "What leads you to address yourself to me? Do you not know how unfit I am to command others? Can you be ignorant of the fact that quite a few don't want me anymore? That these words of the gospel seem to apply to me. We will not have this man for our superior. They are quite right, for I am incapable of being such any longer." So the brother, would be Timothy, confused, edified, and touched by these words, displayed the sentiments of his soul, letting his eyes speak for his lips. And then Blan says, this brother is the one who succeeded Bartholomew. So, but Timothy got turned away the same way that the founder had been turned away. That's another good reason for thinking that business of being turned away has some basis in fact. And the reason for thinking that it was at Mond is because that's where Blan puts it. It's my affair who puts it up in the Saint-Bon. All right, so this is a very dramatic encounter. So this, I think, is the beginning of the rehabilitation of the founder, if you will. And so he decides to go back to Avignon, and then back to Grenoble, probably by way of Avignon. And so there he is in Grenoble, where he's very well received by the brothers. I mean, Grenoble was a place where apparently he was very, very happy. But still kept a solitary existence. Now, the question to raise about the Grenoble situation is, well, he did send Brother Jacques to Paris to find out what was going on. And he went to the Grand Chartreuse for a weekend retreat. Was he tempted? Was he looking around for a place to retire permanently? I think that this may be one of the questions there. He was well received by the brothers, but he didn't get very much involved except for that period where he replaced the brother. And here's where he did spent a lot of time getting his books together and finishing up on his writing, which of course Gus will insist is part of the reason that he still thought of himself as somehow involved with the Institute. But he's taking his time to make up his mind what he's going to do. But the other side of the coin is, of course, as Blanc keeps saying over and over again, nobody up in the north really knew where he was. He wasn't answering letters. Some letters got through to him and he just wouldn't reply to them, etc. So there's no question that he still was in this withdrawal pattern in some sense, anyway, however you want to balance it off. All right, and it's here he gets the rheumatism. Now, how old Helvetius got all the way down here is another interesting question. Blan likes to repeat incidents. He did have rheumatism. Whether or not they put him on the grill again, I suppose, is another question. We have to. those of us who are concocting awards to give tomorrow night, we really have to give a Dr. Helvetius award to somebody. Maybe we'll have to find out who arranged that barbecue the other day. But our group is sponsoring a good part of that party tomorrow night, by the way. Or I wonder if this remedy was such that it could be easily improvised, and the founder was aware that this would have to be done to relieve his rheumatism. But at any rate, he goes through some kind of therapy at this point. Gus, have you anything thought on that? Did it ever occur to you about that grill business in Paris and then down here? That,
I agree with you. It seems strange how important as he was up in the north, come down to Grenoble.
and especially if nobody knew where he was. And of course, he was up in that drafty room up in the tower too all this time. So no wonder his rheumatism recurred.
I think they knew where he was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bland doesn't think they did. We could find that out some more tonight.
Well, this afternoon, I guess, 4
I'll say at 4 o'clock. I don't think I'm coming. I'm having company tonight. Tonight you get to meet
Here
other.
I sit in on 2 hours with you.
You'll all get to meet Honey, my youngest sister tonight. They teach in the same school where this brother's from, so they want to go to the funeral. So I tell them to come to dinner. So, well, anyway, that's the Grenoble situation. Now he goes to Parmeny. Now the question with Parmeny is, how long was he there? It certainly was more than 2 weeks. He might have gone there for retreat for 2 weeks, then going back to the Grenoble community. But as make clear in the Encounters thing, it's from the biographers of Sister Louise that we find out about the fact that, first of all, Yves de Sallion, who was the one who brought the brothers to Grenoble in the first place, Yves de Sallion was acting as the chaplain for the Sister Louise operation. And she, of course, she wasn't a nun in the modern sense of the word. She was a shepherdess and a kind of a recluse and a visionary of sorts and so on, and apparently served. The founder found her helpful in working his way through his own problems and so on. And Yves de Sallion probably figured, well, here's a man looking to kind of retire, and he's looking for a nice quiet place and something useful to do. People are coming here to make retreats. He's marvelous in spiritual direction and so on and so forth, and he's a holy man. So Yves de Sallion has to go off on diocesan business. He makes a grand tour. He's on the verge of becoming a bishop. And so de La Salle, we know from that biography, is in charge at Parmeny for a full 30 days. So that's one thing. And then we also know from the biography of Sister Louise that this Claude Dulac de Montezembert, this wandering ex-gambling addict that the founder takes in, and so on, you read the whole story there in the Encounters, that he comes and de La Salle goes down to Grenoble to put the habit on him, and it's in the register of the school that he took the habit on the 6th of June. Boutet told me that he thinks that that's a mistake, that it was the 6th of May, but I forget what evidence he had for it. So there's this whole question of how significant was Parmeny and Sister Louise in the life operation of the founder. And for the longest while, the French brothers had very little regard for Parmeny and its significance, partially because they were all brainwashed by the biographers who make such little mention of it. They had lost all contact with the property. And it was Burckhardt who was studying over there, and I guess it was Grenoble, and writing his dissertation, and he decided to look this place up. And he found it, and he finally persuaded Nisei Joseph to buy it for the Institute. And so Nisei bought it, and I remember very distinctly in the 1967 chapter when we had the report from the Financial Commission, that and it came up for discussion on the chapter floor, all of the financial difficulties that poor old Nisei had. He had to sell, the diocese of Turin got all mixed up in that Filippini affair, in that institute up in Turin. and Parmeny, and he'd sell off a piece of the corner of the mother house property to help get the money to pay for some of these things. Got in trouble with the Holy See over and they'd give poor old Nisset. These French brothers are absolutely heartless with the man, you know. And the Americans were kind of inclined to side with him on this, because the description we got of the property, that at that time, 25 years ago in 1966, there was no electricity, no water, no road going into the thing whatsoever. It was just this property on top of a hill. And the ruins of of the chapel that had been used for several different things, the history's there in the book. And what the hell do we want this for, was everybody's thing. And the Americans were laughing because it had to, well, who would ever want to go to a place that, oh, we'll use it for a retreat center. I said, imagine asking some brothers to go there with no heat, no water, no electricity. And Burckhardt himself, as he was building this up, lived in a trailer for most of this time, and had to go down all the way, as Sister Louise did, to the bottom of the hill to bring the water up to the top of the hill. And that's the way he lived, brother from the Santa Fe district. So for that reason, it's only recently that Parmeny has come into significance, and for that reason, Yves Boutet, for example, for the longest while, was very reluctant to admit that Parmeny had much significance at all. I visited him in his place outside Bordeaux, and I tried to push him a little bit. I said, on what basis do you want to minimize the stay of the founder there? Well, then he got kind of defensive, and he said, well, now we'll have to see. And I said, well, what about the Grâce de Villard? Oh, I've got that here someplace. And he derricked it out, and he actually photocopied a piece of it. Now he says here, it says, he says, that's the clue. Well, I felt like saying, you're finally catching up to this, huh? Burckhardt was there long before you on this business. I didn't say that to him. So anyway, about 2 years ago, they had a confab at Parmeny itself. Michel, all of these squabblers were there. Rose didn't come, of course, but Yves Boutet came, Michel Sauvage came, I think Patrice, the former French assistant, came, and Burckhardt. And they all gave papers and had a powwow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Michel's paper was mostly on the command to return, a big analysis of that, and I got a copy of it. The others didn't have formal papers, but their original intention had been to publish a kind of a book, a new updated book on the most recent ideas about Parmeny. But so they're still trying to get enough together. So Burckhardt decided he's going to try and put all that together, and he went over there. He stopped at Manhattan just a couple of months ago on his way over there, but apparently, from what I hear, he didn't get much of a reception in Rome for publishing this thing, the results of all of that thing. And of course, Burckhardt's inclined to overemphasize Parmeny, and the others are inclined to. But Michel Sauvage said, the last time I talked to him about this, he said, yes, he said, I think most of us are convinced that the founder was in Parmeny for on and off between February and all the way down into June, and that it was there that he received the command to return, that very, very significant command to return under the virtue of the vow. So those are the problems associated with Parmeny.
In all of this interaction, that fellow Sallian, did he have a great big role to play, or was he minor to Sister Louise? A fellow by the name of Sallian?
Yes, Yves de Sallian. I've been talking about him.
Yeah, but I thought...
He's the one who was the chaplain. He was the priest chaplain.
Yeah.
Sister Louise was the mystic that a lot of people came to see. Sure, he had a big role. He was very important. He was the representative of the diocese, and he's the one who got John Baptist de Lasalle to take his place. And he's a canon of the Church of St. Andrew. Remember, we saw the picture of the church there. Yeah. And he's the... so if we didn't know about him, and he's the one who in 1707 was the one who was instrumental in bringing the brothers to Grenoble in the first place when the school was open, and had the bishop offer to pay to their transportation, get them down there. Sure, he's important. Yes, Peter.
What's the DD and SS?
I put. I'm sorry, I skipped that. Anything, but let's finish the part. Anything else on Parmeny? Let's take a look at that command to return. We certainly ought to read that together. Where is it? 141, right at the very end. Yes, George?
It does mention in this, where you got this beginning,
Yeah.
that during this time in the late 1730s and the early 1740s, he reworked the duties of a Christian. Was that a momentous task, you think, or take quite a bit of work, or you think that's just?
You mean 1713? Well, he's up.
It says from August 1713 on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's-
I don't know
that's-
about when he started.
That's where he's reworking over some of his writings. But if you remember that list I gave in the beginning, the biggest of all of the things that the founder produced were those 3 volumes of the duties of a Christian. And then there's an abridged thing. If you go back and look at the list I gave you way back in the beginning.
Well, I guess I would think that maybe a good part of those 2 years, he was sort of, off by himself down there. He was really like a scholar off in a quiet place to do this work. And that was maybe one of the reasons why he was there. And he was really working for the Institute in a big way.
Well, that's Gus's theory.
Huh?
That's Gus's theory. That's why Gus thinks he was still interested in the Institute. But that was, he certainly, we know from all the accounts, that while he was, not the whole time, just while he was in Grenoble, that there's no doubt that he spent part of his time in the retirement up in that room reworking some of his writings. It is an indication that he was still interested in making some contribution to this work. But whether or not he was going to, at that moment, whether his mind was set to go back to it or not is another thing. And he certainly, it's anachronistic to think of the founder as a scholar going off to do scholarly work. I mean, that would have been incidental to him. He liked to pray and beat himself up and all that sort of stuff. So let's...
You've been brainwashed by Blaine.
Page 139 at the bottom, this marvelous, marvelous letter. Our very dear Father, we, the principal brothers of the Christian schools, having in view the greater glory of God. Now, Michel Sauvage has analyzed the pants off of this thing, but he tries to show that it has exactly the same rhythm as the vowel formula. Having in view the greater glory of God, which is what they consecrated themselves to in the first place. The greater good of the church and of our society. Recognize that it is of the utmost importance that you should again take up the care and general government of the holy work of God, which is also yours, since it has pleased the Lord to make use of you, to establish it and to direct it for such a long time. Everyone is convinced that God gave you and still gives you the graces and talents needed to govern properly this new society which is so useful to the church. It is only just for us to acknowledge that you have always governed it with much success and edification. This is why we very humbly beseech you and command you in the name and on behalf of the body of the society to which you have promised obedience to resume without delay the general government of society. Paris, April 1st, 1714. We are, with the most profound respect, our dear Father, your humble and obedient inferior. Marvelous thing, huh? Now, of course, Bland says that the brothers were wrong to write to him in those words. Well, who are these brothers to deal with the canon that way? So, but it's a remarkable thing, and of course, any treatise on Lasallian spirituality takes this very, very seriously, especially since the thesis of Miguel Campos. Gus?
As you read that, particularly the top 4 or 5 lines, what came to my mind was Timothy in Avignon had written to Paris and told the brothers that Del Sal has the impression that he's no longer needed and that you don't want him. And that's why, after giving that the glory of God preamble, the whole stress of those 5 lines is, we need you, the work is yours, you've done a good job, and we want you back. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, it's evident that theme is there. They must have had some sense of how he felt about them, and that he wanted some assurance that the association was still intact and that they had not abandoned him. There's no question. But this does the trick, but it takes a while. But now, every time, somewhere in here, whether to put it after or before, is what's going on with Brother Bartholomew and the Sulpicians back there. Huh? And we better take a look at that for a minute on page 131. Why did they write that thing? Because everything was such a mess up there. Huh? And what was happening was they saw the original vision of De La Salle going right down the tubes before their very eyes. Huh? So if you look at the bottom paragraph on 131, here's this De Breu, who's in cahoots with Chez Tardy. Right? And so he gets them, first of all, to begin to call him the superior. Now, De Breu replaced Bricot, the one that the cardinal had imposed. Huh? And it was supposed to be only a token thing, according to that written agreement they got. But once Bricot said, oh, I don't want any part of this, old Chez Tardy gets De Breu in there. Huh? He's an agent of the Sulpicians. And there's no question what the Sulpicians wanted. Look at the conditions. The main points of his new organization were these. 1, the brothers should have superiors from outside the community, men capable of directing them, something like the external superiors who direct nuns. And so Bartholomew agreed to this. And so the brothers were instructed every place where they were to get an ecclesiastical superior. So the one they got in Rouen was Blanc himself. And of course the one they got in Paris was De Breu. 2nd, the house and parish should form a separate entity and should depend entirely on the ecclesiastical superior. Okay, break it off from the rest of it. 3, the novitiate should be suppressed as a useless burden. It costs too much to educate and feed all the novices. We've seen all the way along through the thing. The pastors of Saint-Sulpice didn't want Vaugirard. They didn't want the Grand Maison. They didn't want the novitiate. There is no need for so many in Paris, so many novices, since the brothers should remain fixed in the schools where they taught. That's the Paris idea, it was the Reims idea, and it was the Marseille idea. As will be explained below. The brothers should stay in one place and not be changed from house to house. He had that problem in Mons, he had that problem everywhere. And to fill the gaps made by those who die or left who had to be dismissed for misconduct, it was proposed to have 1, 2, or 3 novices in each house according to its revenue and its personnel needs. And 6, finally, a new form of government was to be set up, and they actually had started to put together another rule that they sent to the cardinal. And fortunately, the cardinal put it on the shelf. So in the long run, the cardinal turned out to be pretty good to the society. Okay, so those were the conditions, and here was Bartholomew going along with this thing. And then when the pastor in Mons is running short of brothers and needs more brothers, he writes to De Breu as the superior of the society instead of to Bartholomew. So these Sulpicians were taken over the whole thing, so it was in a terrible, terrible state. So it was a real crisis in the history of the Institute, there's no question. Yes?
On page 132, you get an appreciation for Bartholomew's position, second last paragraph.
Yes. The old trick that they used every time, hold back the salaries. Huh? To get Bartholomew to agree to the plan, De La Salle's rival took the quickest way. He had the brothers' salaries cut off, so the brothers had to go to starvation rations. When they went to collect the money, even asked for charity, they were told to apply to De Breu. Well, a very religious and generous priest who would surely come to their help. Showed confidence in him, even to choose him for their superior. They'd find in him a firm resource, but there was another De La Salle. The brothers were in no hurry, they were wary, they had not lost hope of seeing their father again, they feared he might return. So, all of that. That's what you mean, Gus, huh?
Yeah.
So now, why did De La Salle take so long to get back? We have some evidence from some of the letters that he wanted to make a final tour of the houses in Provence. There's reference to that somewhere along the line. I've forgotten where now. Help me, Gus. A letter. Not listening. Doesn't matter. A letter from Bartholomew that, it's the priest in Mons writing to Bartholomew, says that he has heard that De La Salle has left Grenoble and that he's making a tour. And also the biography of Yves de Sallion says that when he came back, De La Salle went on a tour to Marseille. Well, all right. But if you want to find the real reason, go beyond your assignment for today to page 143. This second last paragraph. As it was decreed in the councils of eternal wisdom that every day of John Baptist's life should be marked by the cross, it was not long before he encountered new humiliations. His great enemy no longer lived. God had called him while the servant of God was still at Grenoble. And of course, Hernandez has the footnote, Chetardy died on June the 29th, 1714. The news of the former's death, which he received there, had hastened his return to Paris. Now, he didn't get the news until around the 1st of July, obviously. For he would not have dared to come back if that man had still been alive. De La Salle himself stated this to some of the brothers he trusted, who must have communicated this to Blanc. But his powerful adversary, although no longer living, had left behind a people who inherited his views and prejudices against the servant of God. So that seems to me to be the best reason why De La Salle hesitated, although he had agreed in principle perhaps to obey that order and saw what it involved. He took his time, and it wasn't until he was really sure that Chetardy was out of the way that he would be in a position to come back at all. And he apparently conveyed that to some people. Jeff?
Do you think that the latter pages about this whole period, as written by Blaine, have a great deal of veracity about them because it's being supervised by Timothy?
Yes. Sure, I said so. That's what I said. That's why I think we can trust the encounter in Mons. Yeah, and we can trust this remark too about the business of Chetardy, death coming along in the picture, very definitely.
Why is it that Blanc sometimes avoids mentioning persons' names, but uses X here to talk about the brew? And I know
Some of them are probably still alive when he was writing.
He's done that before.
Yeah. Some of them, it's one of those niceties of 17th century, 18th century politeness too, I suppose, not to say anything suspicious about people. And if people are going to guess who it is, then he has to have a couple of paragraphs about how wonderful they are. But then the devil gets to them or something. Yes?
I'm trying to explain that delay again. Wasn't it true that when Singleton got that order to come back to Paris, that he discussed that with Sister Louise?
Well, yes, that seems to, her biographers say that. And up until then, she had undoubtedly been hoping that he'd stay there forever as the chaplain. That she's supposed to have told him that, no, this is your work and you have to obey just like the rest of them, and she encouraged him to accept it.
I figured that may have taken a week or two for her to,
Get around to that. Yeah, well, that's possible, but that would only bring you into the middle of April, huh? And here we are, according to this account, he didn't even, he was unwilling to come back to Paris as long as Chetardy was still alive. So he was delaying his obedience until he could be sure that he wouldn't get into the same mess all over again.
I assume he walked.
Probably, yes. And he went by way, we know he went by way of Lyon, where he stopped to venerate those relics, and he stopped in Dijon also and to visit that school. I didn't show that slide of that school, did I, this time?
How long would it take him to walk from the South France?
Well, they covered a good bit of time. It's amazing how quickly they get from one place to the other. I guess they might cover, 20, 30 miles a day, something like that. They were used to that type of walking. For example, when they went to Loes, they left early in the morning and they came back that night, and that's about 25 miles each way. Gus?
I have just been amazed at the whole description of walking in. At the end of Blaine, book 4, there's a series of biographies of brothers that Blaine admired, and the walking that they had to do. Like when he called that retreat at Loes, the men had to walk from Rheims up to Loes, which was 80 miles. They did it day after day, and some of the brothers were sick. At one point, they were carrying
went from Paris to Rouen with the two brothers. They walked that, and they stayed at inns, and that was another thing. They'd stop overnight at. Usually, they'd get hospitality from some convent or some other priest. That was a custom. Everybody was on the road in those days, and it was easy to get the free accommodations overnight or very inexpensively. And the one time, though, when it was a hurry to get up there, Larry Marks, he went by stagecoach to see the Archbishop on that first shot going into Rouen, but that was considered very extraordinary. And the same thing with Mademoiselle Lescure, who lent him her horse. The horse, to get back over all of those very canyon-type things, that would have been a great advantage. But if you read the Poutet thing, or the Charles, I think it's part of that Charles Pierre thing, the road to travel, you know, when you see the cost of all of those various means of transportation, as he concludes at the end of that, that's why they almost always went on foot.
Do we have any evidence of any communication between the brothers in Paris and the Salms in the south, that period?
Nothing except that final order, all right? That's the only evidence we have in there, if you're talking about evidence. But he did send that brother Jacques, the director in Grenoble, he sent him up to Paris to find out what was going on, but we have no idea what Jacques reported when he came back.
I was just hypothesizing, laughing to myself, saying he probably got word that Saint Chardin was dying or is lingering sick for a month or so, and said, let the old bird die before I go back. Or, you know,
well,
I was wondering if there was any, that would probably substantiate or give better evidence to why he delayed so long.
Well, no, but see, the problem with the delay is why did he delay after he got the message from Paris, okay? He didn't show any intention of going back there. Now, the letter from the brothers commanding him to come back is dated April 1st. It's the previous September that he sends the brother up to Paris, and apparently what the brother had to report to him, he didn't like the sound of it at all. I strongly suspect, you know, my guess would be that that brother said, well, you know, things are going differently. Looks like Bartholomew's knuckling under these Sulpicians. They've got a hold of the whole thing. And he said, oh, I don't think I want to get involved in any of that again. You know. And so the thing that, so I don't think he was thinking of going back at all until the letter came. Then he decides he has to obey somehow, helped maybe by Sister Louise. But he doesn't get back for 3 months. Mimi?
The question maybe that's later talking about personality, but it seems like in the later part of his life, his personality has changed somewhat because earlier on, if he had an encounter with a pastor, for example, it's fine, he'll just pull out of here. Or it seems to me opposition head on, and here it sounds like he's retreating from like the
Yeah, but by that time, of course, the Paris establishment was really the center of the whole operation in a certain sense. He had set up another center in Rouen, but there was a commitment of a large number of brothers, and it was in the capital, and it was in before all the ecclesiastical superiors and everything else like that. So, and he may have just I think he might possibly have begun to mistrust his vision a little bit and think, well, maybe they're right and I'm wrong. Because why does this happen to me every place I go? 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. If you add them up, it comes pretty close to that. Oh, it's time for lunch. Okay.